Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Okay, the voice should be better now. Okay. All right. All right. Welcome, everyone. The title of today's episode is The Infinite Dance of External and Internal Dimensions. And so I wanted to share my commentary on something that has recently come to my attention. And that is, just a second, guys, got to change the song here. Okay. I want to speak about perception. I was introduced um, online. I was looking, at some certain philosophical questions, and I came across Leibniz Russell's theory of perception. And so, the theory of perception has to do with the nature of external reality and internal reality, which I often talk about. And I found it so fascinating that what I was saying, it's of course history's patterns repeat, but there was a very interesting conclusion made from Leibniz Russell. So here's the idea. First, there's sort of three solutions to the kind of theoretical perception versus empirical perception kind of dilemma that the human being has. The best kind of way it's explained is it's explained by a man named Hellier Robinson. And so the idea is, I'm just going to read it for you here. Two spheres plus one object. The spheres are concentric with the object in between. Hence, the object is external to the internal sphere and internal to the outer sphere. So imagine uh, imagine a sphere inside another sphere, and there's a distance between the inner sphere and the outer sphere, and in some sense, there is an object there. So, in other words, the inner sphere, the object is external to the inner sphere and internal to the outer sphere. So, I think that's pretty easy to visualize, guys. It's like one ball inside another ball. Now there's an object between the balls in the main ball that's holding all of them, right? So to the inner sphere, it's the object seems external. To the outer sphere, which is holding the inner sphere, the object which is inside the outer sphere is internal. So the first example is two spheres, one object. So an object between the two concentric spheres. The other example is one sphere plus two identical objects. In this case, one object is internal and the other external to the sphere. Yeah, so there's one sphere and there's one object which is outside of it, and there's one object that is inside of it. The other case, there's 3 points that Hellier Robinson suggests, and Leibniz Russell chooses one of these options for his, in some sense, theory of perception. The third option is two spheres, and this is one where I've kind of brushed upon in my talks, and especially it's the focus of this one. I'm going to try to attempt to explain why I feel inevitably Leibniz Russell had to choose this third option. So the third option is two spheres plus two identical objects. So imagine, like the first situation, we have two spheres. Now I want you to imagine there's an object between the two spheres like the first one, but now there's an object outside the bigger sphere as well. Anytime from a dualistic dimension we wonder for any sort of transcendental pursuit, eventually it will move to infinity. So what this means is it's either this situation where there's two senses of self. There's inner self and an outer self, and the world is an object being observed between these. There's, in some sense, just one self, and there is external phenomena, an external object, and an internal object, you know? Or there is an internal and external for every sphere. That means your inner self has a sense of externality, and your outer self has an externality, you know. And I speak about the subjective realm. You know, the subjective realm is, how can I tell you? The way the three options here, these are three various states of mind. The third one is one where the person can only access through trust. I find. Of course, these are theories of perception, you know. But I just wanted to bring the attention of the audience to this idea that there could be an inner self and there could be an outer self, and there could be the world in between these. There could be one self and there could be an outer world and an inner world, or there can be both. There is an inner self and an outer self. There is an inner world and an outer world. Now, Leibniz Russell goes on to say that the inner sphere represents a person's empirical head. The outer sphere is the theoretical head. The object outside the larger sphere is the object, real object. And the object in between is an image of the real object perceived by the empirical head. Okay, so I may be looking too at. Yeah, I mean it's pretty much the same, but he's using it in a more. He's considering it as a lens, guys. He's considering the theoretical head as a lens for um, the object outside the inner sphere, the smaller sphere. But anyways, guys, I thought this was crucial to point out. We human beings have various relationships with ourself in the moment, in accordance to what kind of moment of the world we find ourselves in. You know, a person could be a nice person, but in an emergency, suddenly their colors change. A person could be a calm person, but imagine back in the day in medieval times, your village was under attack. Do you know? So it's as if like the person could have been the most peaceful, but at a time of war, is there peace or is everything in pieces? The morality of man in turmoil also shatters. Our morality is like glass. If a couple times it is disowned, in some sense, it's as if like you're dropping a very precious glassware. The world we live in is alive, but it is alive internally. Externally, it is alive, but it is not meaningful. There is life there's movements of life that are meaningful, and there are movements of life that are meaningless. Do you know? And the meaning is an imposition. Someone could feel that their heart has been beating. They can feel since the beginning of their existence they have fulfilled the purpose of their existence by being the nature they are. The world turns us not only towards the faces of others, but also to the face of our real self. And the real self is the moral self purified out of duality. It is where morality is the movement of nature. It is not a story. You cannot be moral by just stories, or a caged, a mind caged in language. They said something very unique. They said they asked this quantum physicist. I think it was Niels Bohr. I don't know. They asked this quantum physicist. I just know this, that they asked them, "Hey man, tell us about the results of quantum physics back in the day, while Einstein was still alive." And the man said, I don't know what the name of the guy was, but he said, "Let me tell you the results of our quantum physics experiments. It's like we are taking a lion out of its natural environment, putting it in a cage, then telling ourselves, this is a lion. Now we can study it," not realizing that the creature requires the environment as a missing puzzle piece to their true intelligence. You see, we cannot avoid the world anymore because we have stepped out of it, strangely. I find that the human mind is too dynamic and too alive, meaning that there are too many unknown movements that occur through free will, that really there can never be a purely 100% truly organized movement on this planet. The organization has to be entrusted in the overall approach of the system. So, what that means is every human being right now is telling themselves a story where their personality is a character and it steps out of it. It's like just like how a child saw a teddy bear, you know, and like imbued life to that teddy bear. This ego that people talk about, it's like an idea of self where we have given language life. So just like how that child made that teddy bear its best friend, we have in some sense made language the limits of our experience. As Ludwig Wittgenstein says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. What does that mean? That means his conceivable acceptance. You see, it's like there's one part of the intelligence is like how far can you see? Then it's like from how far you can see, what can you do with what you can see? The purpose of individual existence is endless. It's infinite action of design. So you see, the wheel of karma is not just a dualistic framework, it is just a design oriented system. That means the system just breaks and rebuilds, breaks and rebuilds, breaks and rebuilds, and me and you are just in like a certain moment in history, we have opened our eyes. And one thing I'm kind of happy, regardless of what happens in this life, is that I saw the human experience. And I saw how much it still doesn't see. That is the only reason our civilization can evolve. Because the potential is there somehow. Enough of our ancestors had a vision to live for it to come about. And really, this is not said often, but the only good things on this planet that have remained out of the simple decency of human beings, not their complex endeavors. There is a lesson that I learned um, the hard way, karmically, in my life. But I realize it is not my nature. And that lesson was that I would do things in complex ways and I would get the result, but I would see others doing it in simpler ways. That means I saw that I require more effort to attain the same result, and suddenly my system of intelligence just collapsed. Have you ever had a failure in this life that makes you re-question the meaning of success? Like, that's a deep failure. you know and I remember I noticed, I don't know, I think it was a blessing. I had this like me and my brother had this karate teacher, you know like tutor or whatever. And I just remember one thing. We saw the guy maybe for like 3 sessions, and then it was no go, But the guy said something. The guy was also a soccer referee, but he would long story short. But the guy said something very profound to me. He told me to punch him, right? And he was using me as the guinea pig in front of the kind of class for the moment. You know how martial artists are. They need somebody to demonstrate. you know this is years ago, guys, by the way. This is years ago. This is more than 10 years ago what I'm talking about. So anyways, the guy looks at me, and he shows a punch to me and to the whole kind of class, and he says no. He tells me to punch, and I kind of go for like a hook, you know but even at the time, I didn't even know the word hook. It's just I felt like punching. And then he showed me a straight line. He punched me, like literally his hand moved like a straight line. And he told me, like everybody there, like the story of that there's this spider in nature where in the day it goes left and right. It moves in a zigzag pattern in its environment, but at night it comes back home in a straight line. And so he was asking all of us, he's like, why do you think this happens? And people gave different answers, and eventually he said, because it is the fastest way back. Because at night, whether you're an insect or any sort of creature, the shift in environment is alarming to any sort of familiar pattern. So the spider is alarmed, and instead of going the zigzag in a safe state, it's going directly, right? This also has to do with advanced piloting in regards to, of course, it's not for this talk, but I have to speak about the sober state and the sort of psychedelic ideologies and culture, but that's another talk. And anyways, the spider, it comes directly back. So it goes a straight line. So all the times I noticed I had failed to see the straight line to the solution. I was zigzagging around truth. Only when chaos came, my mind went into a straight line of order. Because I didn't care about the world that I felt didn't see me, guys. I think many people are like this. Solitude can be a state where divine views are accessed, or it could be a state where the opposite is accessed. The inefficient may appear, or the efficient, you know. So, guys, we have to understand that in front of our eyes, of course, the design is objective. It's like free imagination. Reality is free imagination. It's already given. This biological body doesn't need proof because it's here, for example. And then I wonder what else is here, and I see that it's like an attention that I cannot contain in my words, I cannot contain in objects. It's as if I have tried. I have tried, and there were times where I was wishing in certain moments of my life that that state of mind was it. But I realized the humility of the cosmos, that some things you are not meant to tell yourself. What I mean by that is certain things are not revealed by your eyes. They are revealed as you trust your world by the eyes of the world. The eyes of the world is this idea that it's not where every living creature, behind their eyes there is one field of intelligence. So we are like the waves of an ocean rather than individual entities moving around in regards to our mental orientation. The fact that there is a sort of phenomenology of mind. Um, many philosophers have wondered about perception, and honestly, let me tell you, philosophers were whether you consider them intelligent or not, they were always sharp. That's what makes a person alertness, you know. This is why I even feel many people who are living in militaristic mindsets after they graduate, after what am I saying? After they a lot of soldiers who realize the meaninglessness of war will find meaning in other means. You see, life reveals different experiences. These experiences shape you, contain you, orient your attention. Now, society is divided with a bunch of people feeling the world is multidimensional, with a bunch of people not feeling dimensional. The moment science acknowledges that the world is multidimensional, well, it's in some sense, the theists and the atheists have more in common, do they not? So what I'm saying is that there are programs that we are living in which we don't have control over, but we have an individual attention that controls where in the program it exists. You know how, to my whole kind of writer's ego, I could tell you there were certain chaotic subjective. There's chaos and subjectivity also, by the way. Unless the person comes into a contentment with their moment that only the free will can be responsible for the divine will, that it is the attention of the human being that liberates it. Really, we are creatures defined by our creations. Isn't it strange, guys? We are defined by our actions, which are creative activities. We are defined by what we create. Whether it's picking a cup from the cupboard, or in some sense, being an Olympian, throwing a spear really far, like, whatever. I'm just saying it's like whatever experience the human being goes to, if they're conscious of how it is being contained, they're also conscious beyond that container, and therefore the mind has access to a sort of parallel thinking, I say. So let me give you an example of this parallel thinking. It's kind of these are kind of this is hilarious to say, but techniques for the imagination or the subjective one. So parallel thinking is when, imagine consciousness originates in an x and y two-dimensional axis, okay? And in accordance to which angle the attention is, I don't know how to say it, but you gotta realize behind your eyes, your attention is the pen of reality. But in front of your eyes, it is attention plus many other things. Do you know I have sat in rooms where I have heard people speak about past lives? I have sat in rooms where those people have thought they are communicating other entities to them. Do you know I have sat in rooms where people felt they were God? Do you know I have sat in rooms where people felt they were nothing? And there's a room where we're all sitting in, which is the idea of the animal. I mean, honestly, where else does evolution beyond thought go? It is an experience. It's an experience. The next language is experiential. It's not symbol. It's not with symbols. It's with rhythmic alignments of the experiences of human beings. In the word intuition will begin to mean something. It will begin to mean a sort of following the commands of the mind of the planet. Now, the mind of the planet is not an ideological system. The mind of the planet is the balance of design. That means chaos and order both know one thing, that they cannot die. Duality knows one thing. This is why the wheel of karma is endless, because it cannot die. In the chaos, there is a tiny bit of order that chaos needs to identify itself. In the order, that order needs a tiny bit of chaos to identify itself. So this whole dilemma of a person trying to be good or bad, it's impossible. When you're completely good, there's a tiny percentage of bad required to identify. When you're completely bad, there's a tiny percentage of good required to identify. And simply the intention of the action. That means Mr. Within is saying, dear human being, treat yourself not just as atoms in the void, but as an intelligence that is the light in its own darkness. There's a poet named Rumi. I want to share with you his insight in his, like pretty much in his poetry, he speaks about the intentions of a transmigrating soul. He hasn't used those words, but that's what he's kind of talking about. So he says, just listen to this poet from 700 years ago, this Persian poet named Rumi, Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi. I died as a mineral, and I became a plant. I died as a plant, and I rose to animal. I died as an animal, and I was man. Why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? I shall die once more as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on to that which no mind has ever conceived. Man, the human being is getting so smart, the only thing that could be divine for it is the unknown. The crystallization of knowledge is an attack on the unknown dimensions of the character of the personality of the being. You know, I found it that it's kind of interesting that many people are not afraid of the dark, but they are afraid of themselves. Carl Jung spoke about a shadow, the inner shadow. The inner shadow is the potential openness to indecent expression. So you can say that the signal of your phone is different when you're in the parking lot of a building than when you're on ground level. So similarly, the attention to the type of thoughts you have, the inner environment, what to do with this environment, inner environment, is the first thing is to understand it. And when you look at the word understanding, it's like, what are we standing under here? A cosmic landscape that is being projected from the brains. When did atoms get so smart? You know? Rumi in that poem was suggesting that there is an inconceivable destination. Do you know what that means? That means the mind is navigating the idea of the body. It's like you may be your actual right now who you are. Let's assume for the sake of civilization that you are this biological body, but the thought of who is in this body every day is a different day. And it's only different because the same eyes are not the same eyes. You see, I have no problem with, in some sense, scientific experimentation because the problem is not the scientific results. The scientific results are actually very helpful. The problem is that the scientific findings are being brought to uh, 8 billion creatures where they do not just function on rational ideas simply because we have an emotional dimension to ourselves that relates the present moment to various other moments of memories. So think of your memory as a moment where you're still standing in. A part of your experience hasn't forgotten that it was there. Most people look for teachers outside of themselves. I feel that's impossible because nobody ever sees the teacher. I have had many, like literally in school and university, I've had many teachers, but I have never seen them. I have never been able to look at the world through their eyes. Only their words have in certain ways opened the world for me. So what I'm saying is it's the recognition of the ultimate solitude of the subjective lens. You see, you have free will, but this free will is in a sort of simulation game. Now, the sensitivity to this simulation game really simply just brings you to direct life attention. So, what does that mean? In the complexity of the subjective landscape, at the edge of the peak, at the epitome of the evolution of that complexity, there's a reversion back into the simple. From that zigzag pattern, the spider instantly comes to the present moment. And so, how can we say there is an infinite dance of the external and internal dimensions of the self? Well, here's the thing, it's all division. That means many scholars cannot admit that a lot of what knowledge is breaking up things and renaming. For the sake of the illusion, the species did not act truthfully. But nature is so wise that I started off realizing there is no, even though there can be passion for a greater face of civilization, but at the end of the day, I understood that if my life is like we're temporary beings here, is in the hand of nature. It's kind of strange, isn't it? It's like karma's like the way we hold nature, nature holds us like that at that. The way we treat our own minds in another sense. I mean, think about it. Imagine person A and person B meet in the park and they start having a discussion. Person A is angry at person B, and person B is calm, but is starting to get angry, you know. And eventually, let's say in one scenario, person A and person B are really angry. What does that mean? That means they both think that what they see is the truth and the other is not respecting their truth. A lot of people do a lot of unnecessary, inefficient activity simply because they're not feeling acknowledged. Do you know how much it changes a person's life, you know, when they're acknowledged? Because what it means is it gives inner freedom. It makes the inner self realize it's not alone, for example. You cannot save a changing world ever, but you can journey through it at least, efficiently, beautifully. I remember like my grandmother, bless her, she every time she would cook a meal when me and my brother were young for us, she would say the food isn't tasty. She would say the food is beautiful. And that term stuck around, that something could be beautiful just by its simplicity, not just by its ultimate complexity. And that really what beauty is, it's a contentment of mind. Can you be a being that is free to not just yourself, but the world that self exists in? Can you see that after 4 billion years of evolution, you have an opportunity? An opportunity, and unfortunately, in this point in history, the civilization is a bit inefficient. That means, let me tell you what would be, and it's so very easy to imagine, guys. What would be a better civilization? Guess what? If the result is inefficient, there is a good attempt to try the opposite. So everything you see about the world now, imagine if it was opposite. So imagine instead of there being separate nations, there was one collective. Do you know? Imagine instead of the government taking from the citizen, the government giving to the citizen. I have this vision that in like 200 years, governments are just going to be resource outlets. People are wise enough to govern themselves, kind of like how Osho was saying that Buddha was like right before he passed away or something. Some guy came to him and said, "Yo, Buddha, is there going to be another Buddha?" Like the guy comes and says, "Buddha, is there going to be another Buddha?" And Buddha says, I think he says in one version he says yes, but in this version he says no. And the reason he says no is because he says Buddhism has spread around to a point where its purpose is complete. It has made its point. What that means is certain ideas in history, they are significant simply because they became part of the voice of a living human intermediary. Ideas never exist alone. They need a human intermediary. They need a conscious attention. They need a light in the room to see the shadow. The opposite of now will be actually a bit chaotic too, because it would mean that if right now the civilization is handling individual members, you know, it's like the opposite of it would be, in some sense, uh, I think individuals controlling the collective. So imagine this, guys, that we as a civilization, as a global community, we just were like, all right, let's hold on for a second and whatever the species wants to do. Aldous Huxley tells us there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. And we started off with Leibniz Russell's kind of vision of his theory of perception. And now that we have kind of been, like, how can I say it? The mind can remodel itself. The blueprint of values behind your eyes can be redesigned. Now, it can be redesigned in accordance to the free will. Sometimes the free will can separate itself, divide and conquer, baby, like that's the ego's way. So it's like there is a sort of, you can be a separate phenomena from the moment. You can also be the whole moment, and every phenomenology is an experience of the mind. So you see, it's like when I see a thunderstorm, I get alarmed, but I smile because I see that it is the mind also receiving it. You see, so the mind right now for many human beings is not in their control. And we're discovering this. I realize in civilization there is never order or chaos. Chaos and order are just two dimensions, like two pieces of paper placed on one another. It's like, and we're oscillating, our attention is oscillating between these dimensions. That means if you have chaotic ideas, you can remain in those chaotic ideas for years. And if you have ordered ideas, you can remain in those ordered ideas for years. The whole point is that how is the attention navigating, and how is the internal value system readjusting in accordance to, just like how a person goes into a new objective environment, there's a new personalization of themselves. Also, when a person enters a new subjective landscape, a new opening to the vision behind the world, then in some sense there comes one's own freedom. You see, the whole point is you can't teach sword fighting to anyone unless they choose to hold the sword and with their own will begin practicing, right? And that own will part will not occur, and it's not something to search after. It's something that if it's like nature, when the tree is ready, it gives its fruit. When the human being is ready to move beyond the human experience, the mind will bear fruit. It's as if it's kind of hilarious. The forbidden fruit was taken, and man fell. And so the ultimate guilt began. But the thing is, and the concern is, sorry guys, my attention is really going too deeply into this. Really, reality is pretty much zooming in and out of how certain shapes, structures, designs, boundaries imply uh, sort of separate units. You see, it's not only we have measurements, we can even have units for emotions, you know. Uh, it's like we there's ways to not just measure a grain of sand, but also to measure in some sense the density of the neurological shift I find. So what is it? It's like the weight of the brain in accordance to the neural activity. I don't know how to say it, but I feel it's like there's something there. For me, a lot of experiential contentment came from writing. I found that when I write, it's like there is a harmony between my biological, like my objective physical movement, and there's a harmony between how the thoughts arise. So imagine a writer writing something quick is where the rhythm and the pace, the speed of the thought is matching the speed of the hand. Now sometimes if the speed of the thought goes faster than the speed of the hand will mess up. Sometimes I've written sentences so fast, it's like literally I wrote over words. But it's all about a sort of wonder about, okay, you're alive once, so what is the value of this once? What is the greatest contribution of the human mind? And I think it is to open the eyes of its species. The day where flags are no longer needed because every human being, is a banner of the greatness of their civilization. You see, the honor part is missing in modern civilization. Modern civilization is kind of born through heavy guilt. It's like I don't know how to say it, but it's if the unknown is here, then the infinite evolution of the known is also here. It's like Zen Master Dogen says, study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. So, what is this self you're studying? The nature of how the direct experiencer is here, and there is indirect observance of, in some sense, subjectivity and, whatnot. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And the only way to make the world a peaceful place is to be able to envision uh, it being able to be one. That means sometimes it's like call it hope, call it faith, whatever. Have the image there, have the potential there. You know, efficient vision is the true leader. Much blessings and also.